Hey, it's the Empire, Boxing Empire, Baxter Boxing. Now, man, finally, man, it's a done deal, man. Devin Haney versus Gary Russell Jr. have agreed to fight each other, and wow, man, $1.5 million, man, and Devin Haney reached out to Gary Russell Jr. and Gary Russell took it. It was that simple. This is what happens when two fighters really want to fight each other. The fight was made less than a week, and like that, bam, fight made. You know, there's a lot of people always talking about A side and B side, and you know who's he fought and all this just ridiculousness in boxing. You know, I understand that Gary Russell Jr. is a few weight classes beneath Devin the Dream Haney, and Gary Russell Jr. took the fight. You know, there is no who he fought, and there is no, you know, A side, B side. There's none of that, you know, usually talking points that these fanboys use from either side. The fight was just made. People were interested in the fight, and it was wild because when people first talk about Gary Russell Jr., it was in reference to Terrence Bud Crawford, because Gary Russell Jr. and Terrence Crawford went in amateurs together, and they fought each other multiple times. You know, before they fought their opponents, you know, they sparred each other, and it was always about stories about who got the better of who. You know, and Gary Russell Jr., who was really serious about fighting Terrence Crawford, he was dead serious about him. And understand that while Devin Dream Haney is multiple weight classes bigger than Gary Russell Jr., Terrence Crawford is even bigger than Devin Haney. He's actually a weight class above him. So Gary Russell Jr. didn't care how big you were. He said, hey man, you know, I destroyed you back in the day when we were in amateurs, and I can beat you now. And Devin Haney popped out of nowhere and said, okay, fight me then. I will fight you for 1.5 million. And it was wild because Gary Russell Jr. said, okay, 2. And then, you know, Devin the Dream Haney said, you know, I don't know about all that, you know. And then, you know, Gary Russell Jr. said, okay, fine, 1.5. We'll just take it, whatever. I'm ducking nobody. And these are facts, man. Gary Russell Jr. has become the favorite in this whole debacle between Terrence Crawford and Devin Haney, just because he's doing a David versus Goliath scenario, which is a smaller fighting a fighter who's extremely bigger than him. Either way it goes, whether it be Terrence Crawford or Devin the Dream Haney, and people are really excited to hear Gary Russell Jr. in a big fight because people have been ducking this guy for years. You know, even that Lomachenko fight, people keep swear on God's green earth that Lomachenko completely dominated Gary Russell Jr. And that was a close fight, man. He didn't completely dominate anything. It was a close fight, and I thought the fight could have gone either way. There's a time in that fight where Gary Russell Jr. dropped Russel Lomachenko, and they said it was a slip. You know, go rewatch the fight. But yeah, man, so now that this fight is agreed upon, this is going to be a big fight. People are going to be tuning in, and these usually are the biggest fights in boxing, the fights that fans really call for. The last time I can remember a fight that got made that the fans called for was the Canelo Alvarez versus Erislandy Lara fight, or the Lomachenko fight versus Guillermo Rigondeaux. That fight did big numbers. those fights did big numbers. The Erislandy Lara fight and Russel Lomachenko versus Guillermo Rigondeaux, those did big numbers. You know, period. You know, whether it was boring or not, whether the fight lived up to the hype or not, that's not the point. The point is the fans want the fight, and it's extremely rare that people get what they ask for. So, you know, it's wild, like I said earlier, because Gary Russell Jr. There's a slew of opponents that Gary Russell Jr. can fight that the fans really want to see, but for one reason or another, it didn't happen. Now, that being said, man, the fact that Gary Russell Jr. took this fight against a bigger fighter like a Devin Dream Haney, it shows that a lot of these fighters who didn't fight Gary Russell Jr., we know who wanted to fight and who didn't want to fight. It was obvious that Gary Russell Jr. wanted these fights, and it didn't happen for one way or another, because there's no way he is gonna duck someone in his own weight class, but he's gonna fight someone 3-4 weight classes above him. It doesn't make any sense. Make it make sense, right? So we're gonna see how this fight unfolds, man. You know, I'm gonna have to rock with Gary Russell Jr. just based off the sheer gall of challenging such a elite level fighter, such a young, hungry lion like a Devin the Dream Haney. You know, undefeated. You know, a lightweight champion. The guy's a star. Let me know how you guys feel about it, though. Like, comment, subscribe. It's the Empire, Boxing Empire. Peace.